Well, welcome to another edition of My Life in Football. And I can tell you this one's fantastic because I've been looking forward to talking to this gentleman for a long time about his career in football. And of course, it is the one and only, the living legend himself, Mr. Andrew Large, of course, secretary of Mousehole FC. And of course, in respect, of course, I had to have the shirt on today, get it the right way round, sitting there talking to the main man. So, Andrew, I mean, what a season. First season in step four, almost realistically couldn't have gone much better, could it?
Spectacular, absolutely beyond belief. And I'll tell you, an interesting reflection on the season is when we got to the playoff semi-finals and played away at Frome, we just thought that was like a bonus, like a day out. I mean, Frome are a great club, great team. And we never thought we'd be in that position. But, even though we were comfortably beaten, it's just a fantastic achievement to play in front of, 1,100 people, probably the biggest crowd we've ever been in at Mousehole, and certainly the biggest crowd that most of the players have ever played in front of. It was just a fantastic occasion. A great season. I have to say, a bit of an inconsistent season in that we had, towards the end of the season, we got in the playoffs on the very last day on goal difference above Larkhall, which is, I have to say, very unfortunate for them. But if you look at all the clubs in the top half of the league, if you take away Wimborne, Frome and Cribbs, a lot of teams lost a lot of games during the season. I mean, we lost 12 games during that league season. We lost a third of our games and still got in the playoffs. So I don't know whether that'll be the same next season. Who knows? But yes, a great season, a very, very difficult season in many ways, because stepping up to the Southern League isn't just a question of the sort of on the pitch playing standards and the quality of the opposition, which is, I think, considerably higher than in step 5. It's also to do with all the other off-pitch matters, and you suddenly become a sort of proper semi-professional club. Yeah?
Yeah.
And in Mousehole's case, we've come from step 7 to step 4 in what seems like, quick succession. I mean, it's not. It's about, 5, 6 seasons. So it's not sudden surge. But you've still got to take account of all the other responsibilities you've got, particularly being a member of the Southern League. And that's been a big learning curve for us. And we've offered any advice and help we can give to our two very closest rivals, Helston Athletic and Falmouth Town, who are about to join the Southern League after promotion this season.
Well, I'll be honest with you, I know we've been talking about that on our show on a Monday, but I've seen Falmouth going into a completely different division.
Have you?
Yeah, I saw it going into something different. So whether that's somebody making a mistake on their expectations or not, I'm not sure. But
I can't see that's the case, because down in Cornwall, you can only ever be in that geographical, whatever the geographical league is.
Yeah, I mean, we'll find out in probably, as this goes out, in about 2 weeks' time. But by the time it goes out, we'll know. But so
Yeah.
very interesting.
It'll be good for us next season in a way, because, as I've said to you lots of times on your Monday evening show, this season, our nearest local derby has been 90 miles away. So 180-mile round trip to Tavistock. But Helston and Falmouth are about 18 and 25 miles away. And so we should have some good bank holidays next season. But it's also for both those clubs, the importance of local derbies is cash at the turnstiles and cash in the clubhouse.
Yeah,
it's a very, very difficult season, meeting all the financial demands at step 4.
Absolutely. So, Andrew, let's go right back to the very beginning then. So, I mean, how did you get involved? I always ask exactly the same question, first question up. How did you get involved in this crazy world of football?
I've only ever been a supporter, a fan. The only football I ever played, because I went to I went to a secondary school that was a rugby playing school, and it was frowned upon to play football in your spare time, even. But me and my mates were dead keen football fans, and we graduated from coats as goalposts through to poaching sort of uh, football pitches on recreation grounds, with a great hollowed out goal mouth. You can imagine, can't you?
Yeah. I saw
And when you were shooting, you had to aim for the pothole.
That's it. Yeah. Get a bit of back.
But it was a supporter. I mean, it was during an area where I was an avid train spotter. Yeah, so this is when I was 12, 13, and I wasn't all that interested in local football. But my hometown team is Worcester City, as you probably have heard on many occasions. And I lived out in the sticks in Worcestershire, and Worcester City then were one of the very top clubs in non-league football in the land. So we're talking about late 1950s. Yeah.
Mm.
And they'd applied every year to get into what was then called Division 4, which is now League 2. But it was always done on a voting system, and the people who had the votes were the 92 league clubs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was very, very difficult for a non-league club to be voted into the Football League, because it meant that those Football League member clubs were voting against one of their own members.
Mm.
Yeah. So I wasn't particularly interested in football, and my hometown team, Worcester City, I heard they'd had a pretty good FA Cup run. So they'd beaten Aldershot, who were then a Football League team. And then they beat Millwall, who were, I think, must have been like 3rd division at the time. And they beat them. Then they got drawn at home against Liverpool. And that's where it all started. Liverpool, home game against Liverpool, who were, they were then a 2nd division side. I think they were near the top. I think they got promoted either that season or the year after. And it was an FA Cup 3rd round tie, the dream of every non-league fan. It starts with the 4th qualifying round.
Mm.
If you win that, you might draw a league club. And when you get past the 2nd round, you then might even draw one of the very, very top clubs in the land. Anyway, that match was due to be played on the Saturday in January 1959. How about that? January 1959. And it was postponed about an hour before kickoff because it had a frozen pitch which hadn't thawed out enough. Yeah.
Well,
So the match was postponed.
Was that Anfield, or was that at Worcester?
No, it was at Worcester.
Oh, yeah. Worcester. Yeah.
Yeah. In their old ground. And I wasn't particularly interested in that match. I was more interested in train spotting the special excursions that had come down from Merseyside, whatever. Anyway, that match was postponed, and it was scheduled for the following Thursday. Yeah. And Liverpool refused to play under Worcester City's floodlights because they were extremely dim, couldn't get away with it now. So the match was a Thursday afternoon kickoff. And on the Monday or the Tuesday, it was announced at my school that the school was going to be closed on Thursday afternoon. And because I wasn't particularly a football fan at the time, I couldn't understand why. And the reason is most of the teachers had got tickets to the match. True, absolutely true. You know how it is. VIP tickets. People who've never ever been to a football match suddenly get tickets to an event that they've got no bloody interest in at all. So, but my dad managed to get a ticket through his work, and so he took me along to this sort of 2:15 kickoff, or it might even have been a 2:00 kickoff, into an absolutely packed ground. And most of the people there were about 3 times taller than me. But I do remember parts of the match because of the excitement of it. And well, the records show Worcester City won that match 2-1.
Wow.
They actually beat Liverpool. So I got the bug from that moment on. So in answer to your question, where did it all start? It started by accident then. I still think I would have preferred to be out train spotting than watching football at the time. But I got the bug. In the next round, the fourth round, Worcester were drawn at home again against Sheffield United. Neither my dad or I could get tickets to that one. And Sheffield United won that match. But with the money made from that cup run, Worcester were able to develop their ground. They had a new, almost whole length of the pitch stand built, proper floodlights, etc. So that was the era where I started to get involved, went to every home match with my mates, started to go to most away matches as well, even went to see the reserves. You turn up in summer to watch the grass grow and do a bit of painting, all those sort of things. And you felt part of the club.
Mm.
That is the key to it. You felt part of the club. You felt as though you were making a personal contribution to its success. At the same time, living in Worcestershire, my dad and I used to go to watch the 4 First Division West Midlands clubs in rotation. We'd watch Birmingham City, Aston Villa, West Brom, and Wolves, who were all First Division sides, and we didn't have any allegiance to any of them. That was quite interesting going to watch them, but it was not the same as going to St George's Lane to watch a non-league match. Yeah, so that's where it all started.
But do you think then, looking at them, was it a case of a bit like what you just said, and a bit like myself, I suppose, you go to watch a non-league club and the atmosphere is different and you feel part of it, but then you go into like a Premier League side and you feel a little bit lost, if you know what I'm trying to say, you're going to see that.
When you go to a non-league match and people are inside the gate, they say hello to you. I mean, it's as simple as that. They shake hands with you. They say, "Where have you come from?" And how long's your journey been? It's just brilliant. Clubhouse is over there, etc. And it's more like a family atmosphere, really. Not everywhere, because there are some quite hostile non-league grounds for whatever reason. But I think one of the things is we've always said there's a sort of camaraderie amongst non-league clubs. And basically, it's a bit like in rugby, the sort of players can kick the shit out of each other for 90 minutes, but it's all over then, and it's all friends together in the clubhouse, etc., sharing anecdotes, a bit like this, and memories, and meeting generations of people who've all been associated with the club. So you talk to young people, and you say, ask a bit like your question, how did you get involved? Oh, my great granddad was involved in the club. Yeah. My granddad was the groundsman and things like that. And it passes on. It's like a legacy, isn't it? A legacy of involvement.
So with Worcester, and you've gone to see them, beating the mighty Liverpool and so forth. When was the next time you managed to get down there to see them? I mean, and what was the difference in the crowd when you did go back to see them the next time?
Very good question. I'll tell you something interesting about those games against Liverpool and Sheffield United. They had about 17,000 people in the ground.
Wow.
A couple of years later, when grounds started to have like police limits, you with me?
Yeah.
Limits on the crowd. The ground limit was 4,500. So basically, there were 4 times the number then, but it was all perfectly safe. Yeah. It's just you couldn't see a lot. You couldn't, if you put your hands in your pockets, you couldn't get them out again, and vice versa. It was very, very tight, and it seemed to take absolutely ages to get out of the ground at the end. Whatever. So where I just got involved watching them in league matches, and those were the days when the Southern League and the Northern Premier League were the 2 top leagues in the country. They were adjacent to what was then League Division 4. Yeah. So we watched with envy over those next few seasons, teams like Peterborough go from non-league into the league, and later on teams like Cambridge United and Oxford United even. But those were great days, and throughout the 60s, we had a really good side. But when I look back, it's still an interesting fact that in order to buy success, the players that were brought in were often ex-league professionals in the West Midlands. Yeah. And I think the mentality of the club was to continue to do that. And of course, there's a cost to that. It's very, non-league now is a very costly business. And I think there's almost a perfect equation between the amount of finance available and the success that it brings. Yeah.
Mm.
So, I mean, you look at all the non-league teams that have gone up into the league have all been very heavily financially backed. And that's not a problem, but it's just a fact of life.
Mm.
So we were always applying to get into the Football League, and I think that the closest Worcester City got was when they were within 3 votes of getting in. But it's an uphill task, isn't it?
Mm.
And it wasn't until the advent of the true pyramid and the automatic promotion, which was much later in the 1980s, that it became a bit fairer. Let's put it like that.
I know Enfield Town had the same situation. They had Enfield had always winning the Conference League and then never
Yeah.
got voted in because it was always, as you said, like votes for votes as such, and you could never get in. But can you remember when your next, you say you went to see the Liverpool game? What was that next game like? And can you remember, any more games in that sort of first season and such that you went to see?
Yeah, I can remember it was in the days when me and my mates we tried to work out where's the best place to watch a match. I mean, now in my grand old age, I always like to watch it over the halfway line because I'm interested in the game as a whole.
Mm.
But in those days, you tend to go behind the goal that your team was attacking.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know why, because you couldn't see anything up the other end, especially if it was foggy. I think it was a game against someone like Clacton, Margate, someone like that. It might even been Tunbridge, I don't know. But it was something like a 5-0 victory. And I do remember also the scouts from the league clubs were already looking at the players because they grabbed the headlines previously.
Yeah, yeah.
But we used to watch every match, and we were quite happy sort of being in the top 6. We were never at the top. I think we won the Southern League Cup one season. That was quite something. We often won the Worcestershire Senior Cup and etc. And something called the Bob Lord Trophy, which was that was like a league cup between the leagues, something like that. But when I look back, I was just thinking about this in the last half hour. In those days, Worcester were described as the sort of slumbering giants of non-league football. And I think someone once pointed out it's the town or the city with the biggest population that doesn't have a league club. And of course, that's still the case now, except that if you fast forward now, Worcester City until 2 weeks ago were a Step 5 club. It's absolutely amazing how things have changed within, my football watching lifetime.
Mm.
But in those days, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, Worcester City were a much bigger club than clubs that have become bigger than them. Yeah. So I'm talking about Kidderminster Harriers. They were the enemy down the road, and they became a Football League club. I mean, that's an absolute disgrace. Hereford United, the old enemy over the Malvern Hills, etc. And teams like Cheltenham Town, who are now an established league club, were way below us in the pyramid. Yeah.
Why do you think that is, though? When that happens, Andrew? I mean, I know the same scenario. You got quite a large clubs like Harlow Town have never made it, and teams like that.
Yeah.
But even Enfield, never made it into the league. So why do you think that sort of thing actually happens in the end, where you get a team that's sort of dominant for a very, very long time, and then all of a sudden you see, what you'd see as smaller sides or same equivalent sides sort of over jump you and end up further up. Why do you think that is? Do you think that's more to do with the money side of things?
Yes, I think it is. It's such a boom and bust, isn't it? Because the teams that made steady progress without overstretching their finances are the ones that tended to have, had sustainable progress.
Mm.
But just going back to the late 70s, that's when the predecessor of the conference came into being in 1979. And I mean, in a way, the greatest moment in Worcester City's history was winning the last ever Southern League in 78, 79. So they became founder members of I think it was called the Alliance, wasn't it? Yes, it was. And that was a merger of the top 12 teams in the Southern League and the top 12 teams in the Northern Premier League.
Mm-hmm.
And that opened up a whole new era of playing on a national basis. So you'd be playing teams like Barrow one week and Dartford the next.
Mm.
Yeah. Before it became regionalised again. But that was quite something. That last day in 1979, when they won the Premier, was a game. It was either Worcester City or Kettering, yeah, to win the title, and the last match was Worcester versus Kettering, and again with a ridiculously high number of people in the ground. I mean, just amazing how many people wanted to go and see it. But in that first season in the Alliance, we had a great home record and a dreadful away record, and finished third.
Mm.
And it was the era in which Altrincham became dominant, and sometimes Runcorn, and occasionally Northwich Victoria, until the Southern Softies turned up, and that was mainly Enfield. We called them the Lily Whites of Enfield. They played like Real Madrid and they looked like Real Madrid, all white, and they gave us a footballing lesson. So the Northern Premier team bullied us because they were really tough. The Southern teams, played what you would now call good football.
Yeah.
Interesting times. But just going back to your previous point about money, I believe that the club got into financial difficulty because it basically overspent, in an attempt to better itself. And I believe in the end, it became actually difficult to pay the interest payments on the debt.
Mm.
Yeah. And that has consequences, because it's not just that you can't afford things, it's the banks start to hover because they can see a big risk. And eventually the club had to sell its ground, which fortunately it owned the freehold of.
But what was that like when that news as a supporter came through? That they they had to sell the ground. I mean, what was it? For people that have been going there on a regular basis, like yourself and friends and so forth. I mean, that must have been a tough time.
It was a collective bereavement.
Mm.
Yeah, it was just terrible. But there were plans at the time to use the net proceeds to build another smaller purpose-built ground, as has happened in lots of other places, on the outskirts of the city where it wouldn't annoy anyone. But that never happened for whatever reason. So the club then went into exile, basically, like a lot of clubs do, and it ground shared with Kidderminster Harriers and with Bromsgrove. I think they were called Bromsgrove Rovers at the time. They're now called Bromsgrove Sporting. And of course, once you ground share away, you lose a lot of income.
Mm.
Yeah. You lose a lot of income and your crowds go down. And that's been the slippery slope for about the last 15 years or so. So it is quite amazing. You're going to come back to Mousehole now, aren't you? In that Worcester City were once, one of the 6 best non-league teams in the country, and until recently they are at step 5,
Yeah.
and Mousehole are at step 4, which is just unthinkable.
Mm. It's incredible. I mean, and of course, I think they've got their own. They got back into their own ground now, Worcester, haven't they?
Have they what?
They got their own ground again now, Worcester.
They're putting in planning permission for a new ground, which will be like a community sports hub, which I think is the way forward, sharing with other facilities. But at the moment, they're renting a ground which is owned by the county FA,
That's right.
and they rent that ground, and of course they've just won the Hellenic Premier League, going up to step 4. So their major decision now is how soon will the new ground be built to step 4 spec, or have they got to invest in the county's ground that they lease?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And of course, just missed out, of course, on the FA bars, of course, which again, as we sit and do this, is this Saturday. But so when this all happened, can you remember? How into sort of sharing with Kidderminster the Harriers? How long was you still up in Worcester at the time?
I'd moved away at that time,
Mhm.
and part of my story is I've watched non-league football wherever I've lived and worked. So a whole host of clubs I've watched as my job has moved around, but they've always been the first club to look the results up on. But I think times have been difficult, and I think there's a lot to learn from difficult times, in that you can't overstretch yourself financially, because that will bite you in the bum long term. And the days have gone where um, you could bring forward local players and sell them at a high price to a football league. It doesn't work like that anymore. So we always used to ask the question when we had a couple of players way back in when must it been 70s, 80s, that was sold on to Derby County and Everton at quite substantial fees for the time. You've got to remember, this is 50 years ago. Getting 27,000-30,000 pounds for a player was like a small fortune. But it didn't necessarily do anything other than sort of reduce the indebtedness. Yeah. And so all those things you prayed for, like discover a gem and sell them on at a high price, or better still, get a televised FA Cup match. It's just a lottery. It hardly ever happens. So you have got to cut your cloth accordingly.
And of course, everybody still hopes for that even today.
Yeah. The interesting thing about they were in the one of the other difficulties Worcester faced was, and they're going to face the same difficulty in the next month, is that geographically they're right on the cusp, the geographical border between the northern section and the southern section of the country. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've seen, again, going back to the predictions, I think I've seen them in the Northern Midland League, and I've also seen them in the Southern.
Yeah.
So I think, as you say, depending on how it all pans out, and
Yeah.
well, we now know he's been relegated, he's been promoted as such in most of those leagues now. So yeah, I think it's just a case of where does the line fall?
Yeah.
Does it go out one way or the other way?
Yeah, but it also makes a major difference to player recruitment. So I can remember writing in a piece I was invited to write for the club as an exile myself, that I'd got a job in Hampshire, and I was really looking forward to watching Worcester City play at places like Gosport, Havant and Waterlooville, and all those southern teams, only to find out that the FA had put them in the Northern Premier, the northern division of the conference rather than the south. So that was quite interesting. But I mean, they've yo-yoed quite a bit, and there have been situations, haven't there, that I mean, I can understand now. I understand a bit about the formula. Why Bishop Stortford, which seems to me to be a southern club, is in the northern section of the conference, and Worcester City are in the south, and Gloucester City, which is further south, are in the north, and all those sort of things. It's all to do with counting, isn't it? Counting numbers until you've got the divisions fixed. But there we are.
Yeah, and it could happen again this season to Needham Market. Of course, you could end up in a North Vanarama North and not the Vanarama South. So it'll be an interesting one. But so you've moved away from Worcester and you're keeping an eye on them. Where did you was it then you moved from Worcester to where you are now, or was
No,
just
no, no, no. I've moved dozens of times. I moved. I went to university in Reading,
Mhm.
way back in the 60s, and Reading were then in the third division South. That's what it was called at the time. So I watched them at their old Elm Park ground, grand old ground, with huge stands and terraces. That was quite good fun. And then what happened then? Oh yes, I moved to Winchester and started watching Southampton in their Laurie McMenemy years.
All right, yeah.
And there weren't any, there weren't many non-league teams there that caught my fancy. Then I moved back to the Midlands, so I watched Worcester City when they were at home, and then later on Telford United,
Right, yeah.
the old Telford United, the former Telford United that, lo and behold, tried to buy their way to promotion, got stuck, and had to reform as a fans club
Mm,
in the Northern Premier League Division One North. So they went from conference full time to step four in the
mm.
blink of an eye in 6 weeks. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and of course they're in the Southern League now as well. Just missed
Yes,
out.
they lost at home
They
on.
did, yeah, to Leamington. Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite a surprise. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I lived in Leamington as well and watched what was once called Lockheed Leamington. Then it became AP Leamington in their old ground that was opposite the factory that made brakes and clutches. Lockheed, in other words. And Leamington were called the Brakes. And they've actually moved to a new ground on the outskirts of town as well. So
Mm,
there we are, yeah. So in my moving away, who have I watched? Havant and Waterlooville,
mm,
Burton Albion when they were a non-league side, yeah. When Nigel Clough was manager, yeah. And in the year in which they got moved from the Conference South to the Conference North, they actually won the conference, got into the Football League, where they are now, I suppose you could say, reasonably firmly established as a league club.
mm. No, absolutely. So when was it then that you moved from from all the different places to where you are now, and when did that actually sort of come into effect, and how did you get involved with the amazing club, of course, that is Mousehole? How did that happen?
Um, Carolyn and I, when we retired, decided we could live anywhere in the world, but we'd always wanted to live in Cornwall. So we moved to Cornwall. We were living in West Wales at the time,
Oh wow,
and I was watching Welsh Premier League football at Aberystwyth Town, which is actually quite good.
yeah,
But you can't compare the standard with the English system because you never ever played English teams. They were their own league, but quite good. So we moved to Cornwall and moved to Paul Village, which is where Mousehole Football Club is, and I discovered them purely by accident when out walking the dogs.
mm,
And they were playing in the Southwest Peninsula League Division One West, which is what you would now call Step 7, which is now known as a feeder league to the
mm,
National Leagues, so Step 7. And I went to watch them. I thought they were pretty good, actually. Their player manager was an ex Premier Division footballer called Wayne Quinn, who played for, who did he play for? Sheffield United, Newcastle, West Ham. So he brought a style of football to the club that the club has never relinquished. It's always played since those days a passing style of football. And I saw a notice in the clubhouse with one of those Lord Kitchener pointing his finger at you saying, we need volunteers. So I volunteered. And since then, inflation of roles has taken place.
So what did you start off as?
uh, Program editor.
Right, okay.
Now, program editor is about 1/10 of all the things I do. So yeah. So that season was pretty good. They actually won the league by a massive margin. That they only lost one game that season. That was to Plymouth Argyle reserves, and they were just fantastic. And ever since then, there's been an ambition in the club to continue to grow and develop, and that's where we are now. So I think I've watched almost all matches in the last 8 years, home and away. It's a bit of a difference. Step 7, you never travelled further than the edge of Cornwall.
Mm.
Yeah. So that was like a sort of 50-mile round trip, something like that, 60, 70, 80-mile round trip. Now it's 7,500 miles in the Southern League, total mileage.
What was that? What was that like though? So you come out of step 7, go into step 6. I mean, what league did they come into at step 6?
Southwest Peninsula League Premier Division.
Right, okay.
So that was involved all of the bigger clubs in Cornwall. You've got to remember, Cornwall's a bit of a football backwater. It's predominantly a rugby county. And one of the measures of that is if you tune into BBC Radio Cornwall Sport on a Saturday afternoon, you get about 5 minutes of football and 5 hours of rugby. Yeah. That's an indication. So, football sort of wasn't regarded as a major sport. It is now.
Yeah.
Because a number of clubs have now taken the upward step, and it's put football on the map more generally. So that was step 6.
Was there some memorable games at step 6 that you can think of?
Yeah, mostly winning local derbies, away, like at places like Penzance, yeah, which is a mile and a half down the road. Yeah. It's sort of bragging rights, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you'll meet people the next day who were supporters of the other side. Yeah, I mean, quite a few cup successes along the way. County cups. But I think it's true to say that the club benefited from the FA's restructuring. Yeah, so there have been 2 restructurings, one of which was to increase the number of divisions at step 4, which had a downward effect into step 6. So the club benefited from that. And it also benefited during the 2 COVID seasons. And in that second COVID season, we were top before it was curtailed. And the FA decided to award promotion to the Western League, which is step 5, yeah, based on points per game over those 2 seasons. And this is quite a memorable bit. They had spaces for 60 clubs nationally to be promoted based on points per game. And they had a list of all the points per game of all the clubs. And we were 62nd. We were 62nd on that list by like a third decimal point. Yeah. And 2 clubs around where you live, I think, around your area, declined promotion because it was an offer made by the FA. Do you want to be promoted or not? A couple of clubs. No, we must have been 61st because we came in at 59th. So it's one of those things, one of those sort of lucky things in a way that's happened. So we took up the Western League challenge, came 4th in our first season, won it in the second season, again on the last day of the season.
Mm.
the very last day of the season. Yeah.
That season, though, I mean, if we just go to that season, the season you got promoted into step four, I mean, from what, I think it was Adam was talking to me about before and you've searched it before, it didn't start off that well, did it?
It was a bit up and downy. Yeah. Yeah. Um, no, it didn't. I think that's been a feature actually, is sort of bumpy ride. But I think as a club, and particularly during the management, within the management and coaching setup, there is a belief that you learn from the downsides.
Mm.
Yeah, you learn from the downsides, and I think I've said to you on a number of occasions, whatever happens in any one season, you learn from it, because if you don't, you'll never progress.
Mm.
So you're never disheartened, you're never over jubilant. It's what you learn from it. And I think in that second season, we had a great season, but it wasn't until the final day that we won. But it's an interesting reflection. You talk about, do we remember particular games? I remember on the midweek, the last but one game in that second season, we went to
Bridgewater, wasn't it?
Sorry,
Bridgewater, that was, wasn't it?
we went to Bridgewater, who I think were out of the running, and if we had lost, Saltash would only have needed to, I think, draw on their final match. And in the 88th minute, we were 2-0 down. Yeah. And got back to 2-2 in the 88th and 93rd minute. And that draw set us up, knowing that a home win by any margin would secure us the championship. So we had a big crowd there. I know, I spoke to the Bognor Regis manager about their home gates, and they were saying they were getting between 1,000 and 2,000. We got our highest attendance in that last match of the season, which is just under 650. And put it in context, when I first went to the ground when we were in step 7, there were 46 people there,
Wow.
and I think about 6 dogs. I'm not sure they were counted, but yeah, you could actually count the crowd. You could do a head count. How many people are here? The answer was 46.
So what was
Um,
what was that day? What was the day like leading up on that Saturday for the final game of the season, knowing full well that you just had to, probably match Saltash's result or whatever going into the last game. How nervous were you when you arrived? And what was the feeling like around the ground when you actually got in there? Was there a lot of nerves in there? Could you feel the nerves when you walked in?
I don't think anyone had slept the night before. Everyone looked a bit, slitty-eyed, and a bit pale. It was nerve-wracking because your whole year of your life
Mm.
hangs on the next 90 minutes. Yeah. Um, but it all came good on the day. I can particularly remember the end of the game, in which people were in a state of disbelief, etc. And I think it was David Martin. I think, was it not David Martin? John Poole, the chairman of the Western League, a man of few words, presented this magnificent Western League trophy that has got some very, very famous names on it.
Mm.
Tottenham Hotspur, West Ham United, going way back 100 years or so. He just presented the cup and said, "Well done." That was it.
I
And
remember,
then it's
I
sort of,
remember, I remember seeing the trophy because it was when we interviewed Brian once. I think one of the weekends when you was
yeah,
unavailable, and he
yeah,
had it sitting behind the back of him in his room where
yeah, yeah.
house. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a fantastic trophy. But I mean, it's just looking at the sequence of all the clubs that have been in this, that are bigger clubs now. Yeah,
Mm. Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
And I think that's what I remember about my time. I was thinking way back. I think I said this to you before in a previous program. When I think back of all the clubs that we feared way back in the 60s and 70s, it was teams like Chelmsford City. Yeah, they were big. Weymouth, they were to be feared. And funnily enough, Cambridge City, not Cambridge United,
Mm.
and also the team that's at Wembley next Saturday in its no, next Sunday in its reformed state, Romford.
Mm.
They were really, really good sides. Yeah, really, really good sides.
Mm.
So yeah. The other memories are cup runs. Yeah, cup runs. We in the season we've won in 78, 79, that last Southern League season, the last ever Southern League season in its then format, we actually beat Plymouth Argyle at home in the FA Cup when Malcolm Allison was the manager. Yeah. And he was parading in front of the fans in his fedora hat,
And
smoking
cigar.
his cigar and a
Yeah.
fur coat. And I think we all thought, perfect motivation. We, we beat them 2-0. And then we went away to Newport County, who were then a third division side in the next round, and scraped a 0-0 draw and a replay. And the replay at home, we were winning 1-0 until the 90th minute, and then scored a deflected own goal and got absolutely hammered in extra time because they were full-time professional, we weren't. That was devastating. So there are some devastating memories as well, like losing in the quarterfinals at the FA Trophy at Bishop Stortford, probably managed by John Radford,
Mhm.
the old Arsenal
Yeah.
centre. So lots of memories like that.
So this season, it's just gone, step four for the very, very first time, and let's be honest, a successful season as well. What
Yep.
what would you have said was your favourite away trip this season, and what would you have said was your favourite home game this season?
I think the beginning and the end of the seasons at home were spectacular because we played, I think it's Paulton Rovers in our first match. And that was the first match at the highest level.
Hmm.
Yeah. The first home match on the hallowed turf, as you call it. And, we'd had a bit of trepidation going into the Southern League because we were suddenly amongst the big boys, big teams in big centres of population and presumably with big budgets. Sorry to keep on about cash, but that pervades almost everything you think about at this level. And we won that match 3-0. That was brilliant. And I think the Saturday before that, our first ever Southern League had been away at Westbury United. Yeah. And if you've ever been there, it's an absolutely beautiful part of the world. And there's a hill not too far from the ground that's got a white horse carved into it. Yeah, absolutely spectacular place to be. And we won that match. That was 4-0 away. So our first two matches were 4-0 away, 3-0 at home.
This is easy then.
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah. And then right at the end of the season, we put together this 5 wins in 15 days, which it's like a blur now because we were beating some big sides by big scores. We beat Bideford, who had been one of the favourites of the playoffs. We beat them 5-0, and so on and so on. But there's a thing on non-league matters you're probably aware of, which has got a prediction table. Yeah, it's got a table of predicted,
Hmm.
and then they go through all the results they think you'll get. And it's interesting because they had us finishing fourth because they didn't expect us to lose at home to Milksham Town about 6 games from the end of the season, which that was probably one of the worst memories of the season, if that's part of your question. What was the
Yeah, yeah,
worst
yeah,
memory?
no, absolutely.
Yeah,
I remember it because the reason I remember it for is because I think was it an evening game?
it was an evening game.
Yeah, because I had to be up for work early in the morning, so I went to bed and it was 2-0, and I thought, oh, another 3 points, happy days.
Yeah,
And I woke up in the morning and it was only like I think it was up to about I don't know 8 minutes, whatever it was, and I went to bed and got up in the morning and looked at it and went, hey, we lost 3-2. What's happened there? And then
yeah,
it
4-3.
4-3, so yeah, and then it was just like,
Yeah,
wow, what happened there? Yeah.
yeah, we were 3-2 up in the 92nd minute.
Mm.
And I think probably the thing, I keep on talking about what you learn from adversity. I think game management should have been the name of the game then,
Mm.
because Melksham had got nothing to lose. We were looking nervous. We were waiting for the final whistle. They scored 2 goals in added on time to win the match 4-3. And I mean, all credit to them for going out for the win.
Mm.
If you've travelled a long way, you don't want to settle for a draw if you can win, do you?
Yeah.
When they're likely to get home at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's much better to get home with a win under your belt than just a draw or a defeat.
Mm. I mean, but that night though must have been, as you say, must have been a bit took the wind out the sails a little bit.
It certainly did.
Yeah.
It certainly did. But it also makes you think we're learning at this level. We've played other teams away when we've been let's say 2-1 down. And when you look back, you notice the home side closing the game down. Yeah.
Mm.
Altering their style and their formation, etc. And that's part of the process. In the playoff semi-final against Frome, we last Wednesday, we thought we're just glad to be here. We can play in a relaxed fashion. Frome will be the nervous ones,
Mm.
because they've been near the top all season. Virtually their whole season hinges upon what they now do. Perhaps they'll be nervous.
Mm.
Perhaps we can sneak a win. They scored very early on, and then scored another, and then scored another. And they were 3-0 at half time.
Mm.
Their second half performance was a masterclass in how to shut the opposition out. It really, if you enjoy watching a whole game and not just your own team, if you enjoy watching the sort of how the mentality translates into the tactics on the field, it truly was a masterclass.
Mm.
They went down to 10 men after 60 minutes after a second yellow card, and we thought, maybe we can get back in it. No way. I think their goalie was virtually untroubled for the whole of the match.
Yeah.
Just excellent.
I was thinking exactly the same thing when I saw it was 10 minutes. Oh yes, there's a chance. There's a chance. But as you
Yeah.
said, that's
Yeah.
just them. I suppose with more knowledge at the level, possibly. If you know what I'm trying to say, and how
I
to.
think so.
Mm.
I think so. And you gain that knowledge through experience by definition, don't you? You don't just pick it up from, talking about it. You pick it up by doing it.
Mm.
And I think if you experience a loss like that, then you have to think, what could we do to be better?
Mm.
Yeah.
I've
But
just seen that.
nevertheless, it was a great day out, like I said before.
Mm. I mean, I've
And I
just.
think Bloom eventually deservedly got the win they needed to go back up to where they actually belong.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at to finish with. I'm just looking to see Division 1 South. I predicted who's going to be there next year, and it's basically telling me on here Bashley, Bermondsey Heath, Bideford, Bishop's Cleeve, Bristol Manor Farm, Cribbs, Evesham, Exmouth, Larkhall, Malvern Melksham, yourselves, Tavistock, Westbury, Welland Rovers, Yatetown, and then the new ones. So Cirencester Town coming
Yep.
across from the Central League, Cinderford Town, Worcester City, Falmouth Town, Helston Athletic, and Shaftesbury.
Yep. I think that is a very likely makeup, except that someone from I think Bishop Cleeve told me that Malvern quite fancied applying to go into the Central Division.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know how the count works, but Malvern and Worcester are very close together. There's only about 8 miles between them. So I don't know whether if Malvern went into the Central Division, Worcester would as well. So that's an interesting. But I mean, I can see the sense in all the rest. But the fact is, there's got to be 22 teams in that division, so there might still be some outliers. And we were looking on the map and looking at Didcot Town. Yeah, Didcot Town seems to be a long way out, east and in sort of northern area, but they must be on the cusp between Southern League and Isthmian League, I would have thought. And if it's Southern League, it could be Central or it could be South. So you never know. I
Yeah,
mean, from us, Didcot is as far as Bashley is.
yeah.
Yeah. Bashley's the outlier. And to some extent, Bemerton Heath at Salisbury are as well. That's going east. And going north, you've got, well, Malvern and Worcester. Yeah.
Mm. And of course, you don't want Worcester going into the Southern Central, do you? You want them to stay where they are.
I'm not moving out again.
I'm saying you want Worcester to stay there just so you can get a game, don't you? That'd be nice.
Well, I think it'd be interesting, but yeah, it'd be strange, wouldn't it? But there's always the potential for a surprise. So, you know, Cinderford were in the Southern League, weren't they?
Yeah.
In the Southern League South for one season. They got promoted through the playoffs through 2 away wins, I think, Cinderford. Yeah.
Mhm.
And they could be in the Southern or they could be in the Central. So who knows? It depends how the count is managed. And also the other thing is, who knows whether any of the clubs above, below, or in that division, you know, will resign, be demoted, take voluntary relegation. You know, that's the uncertainty in the next month, because all this is decided in June, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. Now I think someone said it's literally 2 weeks. I think it's the end of. I think last year it was about the 19th of May. So yeah,
Really? Oh, right.
yeah,
Okay.
they were not too
So I
far away.
presume they have to give time for appeals, don't they?
Yeah.
Because I think, was it Marlow who appealed against their allocation a
They
couple of years
appealed,
ago?
moved. That was this year. Moved from the Summer League Central, moved across into the Isthmian League and got promoted to Step 3. You can say for
Yeah,
Marlow, it was probably the correct decision. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, all good fun. But Andrew, time's run away from us. A massive thank you for joining us today. Really, really do
My
appreciate it.
pleasure.
Stay on the line. But from me, a massive thank you to Andrew. We'll be back next week for another episode of My Life in Football. But from me and from Andrew, good night.